Welcome to Season 2 of Classical Education, a podcast for those who believe in rediscovering the art of asking questions, engaging in conversation, and attending to the ideas at the heart of well-ordered teaching and learning. Adrian Fries and Trey Bailey invite you to join them on a journey in pursuit of the true, the good, and the beautiful as we participate in the great conversation and listen to the many voices coming from the world of classical education. We are honored, Trey and I are honored today to have a very special guest, Richard Ferrier. And we met him through the Facebook Classical Education group and have been so blessed by many of his wise comments and helpful posts, and decided we wanted to get to know him better. And we're really excited because I think he brings many years of experience in classical education to the discussion. And we just want to get to know him along with you, introducing the whole Facebook page to him. So when you see his posts on the Classical Ed Facebook page, pay attention because Richard has a lot of wise words to share. And so I'd like to start by asking Richard to share his background. He's got extensive background in education, and we're really excited to introduce you to him. Take it away, Richard.
Thank you very much. Well, I don't want to spend 10 minutes on my past. I'm 73 years old, so I've got a bit of a past. But let's see. Let me say this. I was educated in the K through 12 system in Sacramento, California, in the 50s and 60s, and it was very good. In my high school, you could take Latin, Russian, French, German, and Spanish. That's how good it was. Just a public school in a mid-sized city. Well, it was a state capital. Anyway, so that was my original K through 12 education. Then I went to St. John's College, Annapolis, graduated from there, and overlapped some for reasons that I won't go into. I did my senior year in 2 years. Because I was teaching at a K through 12 school, Key School, private school in Hillsmere Shores, Maryland, near St. John's. I taught there for 5 years, and about subjects that we want to chat about in this podcast. Maybe get a sense of what I might be willing to do for you. I taught physics, 6th grade and 10th grade. Algebra, geography, Greek to 7th graders, English literature, American literature too, and acted in and directed in various plays. HMS Pinafore, Aristophanes' Clouds, the French version of Antigone, Jean-Henri's Antigone. And I wrote they call it the book in the theater trade. I wrote the book for a musical adaptation of Peter S. Beagle's The Last Unicorn. Then I went to graduate school. I got a Ph.D. in the history of science, in particular in the history of mathematics. I got married. We started to have a bunch of kids. I have 8 now. 8, that's it. I'm 73. my wife is 68, I guess. And we met at St. John's. Then the thesis, by the way, was on the real inventor of algebra, is the 16th century mathematician, Francois Villette. You might have read him at St. John's. He's been in and out of the curriculum there. Then I came to Thomas Aquinas College, and a word about that, it is absolutely classical education. It's Latin, mathematics starting with Euclid and going up to Einstein, the natural sciences starting with the observation of biological matters, astronomy, music. I've taught music, sing in a choir, and have performed in plays where you have to sing. And we do plays, have done plays, I don't know, 10 maybe, at our house on a brick patio we have. I've played Julius Caesar and the king in Macbeth, Duncan. And that's because I'm older, see, and they cast me as the old guy who gets killed. I also have done the Duke Senior in As You Like It, and the plays we do have done are all Shakespeare. Oh yeah, well, and then I have a lifelong interest in American history and civics, and that plays into our textbook, which people can still buy on Amazon, but it's going to be published more broadly. I say it's Andrew Seeley and myself are the co-authors. It's going to be published more broadly by Tan Books, St. Benedict Press, and I've turned it into a book for adults. It's a textbook, right? I turned it into a general book for everyone, and that's going to be published by St. Augustine Press this spring. So there you go. That's something about me.
That's wonderful. I'm so excited. You gave us, I think, a lot of things that we're both probably feeling like we have about 10,000 questions we could ask you right now.
Fire away.
I think I'd like to start with asking, with that extensive background, coming out of California public schools, back when they were still pretty good, and then going through these wonderful classical programs in college. How would you define the purpose of education, and how have all these experiences affected your teaching?
Purpose of education as a whole, from little children to graduate school, is to strengthen the soul so that one loves and seeks and finds some of the truth concerning the things that are central to human life. That's it. That's what it's for. Now there's and I should say one more thing though. Well, put it here. The way we put it at St. John's in our motto is to make free men, make free human beings. The truth shall set you free.
Right.
Now the free man is not only free with respect to his thinking about speculative matters. People don't like that word or they don't understand it. I'm not talking about the stock market. I'm talking about that you see, specto, spectare, look at, contemplate, the things that are worth knowing for their own sake. But there's another aspect of freedom, particularly in a free society, and that is loving and knowing your republic, so that you take your part as a free human being in the common life of the community that you belong to. So it's, in a way, it's to make the free thinker and the free citizen.
That's right. Okay, so St. John's, that's great. I love their definition to help set people free. How is that different or similar to, say, the purpose of education as defined by Thomas Aquinas University?
It's a college, by the way, not university.
Okay,
Thomas
thank
Aquinas
you.
College. Well, it's pretty much the same, with the exception. I mean, we are indebted to St. John's. Our founders took some of their original thought from Mortimer Adler and the people at St. John's whom they admired, and the people they admired were my teachers. That's our founders. There are only 2 of them alive now. There were 4 principal ones. But the difference is that we are proudly, happily, without apology, Catholic. And so in our conversations in class, we're free to refer to Holy Scripture and some of the teachings of the Catholic Church as relevant to the discussion. So, for example, you read Chaucer, you read The Wife of Bath's Tale, you can bring into it Adam and Eve in Genesis, what St. Paul says in the letter to the Ephesians, um, the most recent writing on that, on the dignity of women by Pope John Paul II. Now, we try not to bring things they haven't read very much. So the papal document we wouldn't talk about too much, but the Wife of Bath, that's one of the books we assign. And the way Dante talks about Beatrice, the way Benedict, it's Bernard, I think, in the Divine Comedy, reveres and thinks about the Virgin Mary.
Right.
That comes up. One of the things about St. John's and Thomas Aquinas College is by having a single set curriculum, you have a common background of things that you've talked about. You haven't agreed about everything in all of them, but you have a shared heritage.
That's right. That's how the University of Dallas core program is as well. I worked at UD for the last couple of years, and the core program is very similar. Everybody takes the same classes, and so they have that commonality that really unifies and brings community to the whole campus.
Yeah, it really does. And I think I saw someone saying, quoting John Sr., saying that these things haven't succeeded. I beg to differ. We just started a new campus. We're going to have twice the students next year that we had, say, 5 years ago when you add the two campuses together. And you people are sowing the seed. You're the Johnny and Joan Apple seed for classical learning in the K through 12 world, and conversations about classical learning in college and graduate school too.
Right.
I really admire the work you're doing.
That's very kind.
Thank you.
That's very kind of you to say, Richard. And part of the conversation, I think, going back to this idea of making free men, I think is reminding folks who are desirous of pursuing an education of the differences and the relationship between the liberal arts and the servile arts.
Yes.
So I wonder if you could take some time to perhaps explain the difference between those and talk about how a program like that at St. John's or any of these other liberal arts colleges will actually prepare you for a career in the servile arts in ways that perhaps contemporary students are not being prepared otherwise.
Yeah, let's call the servile arts the useful arts. All right, the liberal arts are those that form the mind or feed the mind, strengthen the mind in and the heart in the fundamental ways human beings encounter God's creation, or for those who don't believe, the wonderful world of nature that surrounds us. They enable you to see it more clearly. That's obvious in the natural sciences. But it's also the case that mathematics is not just a tool. The things in mathematics are truths, and they are wonderful. One of the things I'd advise people who are trying to do the kind of work you're doing, I mean, all the people who listen to this kind of podcast, is take delight in mathematics and then show it to the people you're trying to teach. The truth not only frees you, it pleases you.
Yes. You know what? I want to interrupt and say something here because I think this is really, really important to the conversation. One of the concerns that I have in the whole classical education movement is the use of the word tools. Yeah. And I love that you said math is a truth, not just a tool.
Yes.
And I think that's an emphasis that is missing in a lot of the classical ed movement. And to take it and look at the delight in math and in learning math, and for teachers who are new to classical teaching that love math and are teaching math, to encourage them, like what you're saying, that you're awakening wonder and delight in learning about the beauty and the truth in math and not looking at math as a tool. I think that's a really important difference in how we teach math classically versus how we teach math in a regular school.
I think that's really right. I couldn't agree with you more. Shall
Yeah.
we go to the other three liberal arts? Well, actually, we didn't mention in the liberal arts. There are two mathematical ones: arithmetic and geometry. Now, this is what you find in well, it's who is it? John of Salisbury, I think, a medieval writer who comes up with those four. They're called the quadrivium for mathematical arts: arithmetic, geometry, and then the other two will surprise people as being mathematical, right? Or one won't. Astronomy, but it's astronomy as how shall I say it? From the way it looks in the heavens as the dance of the stars, which turns out to be something you can model and number. Um, uh, and so it's you might put it this way, particularly because you measure it, you use numbers in astronomy. Um, you know, how many degrees from the equinox is such and such a star in longitude, that kind of thing. Well, that's a measurement. So astronomy you might call arithmetic dancing.
I love that. And that is very close to like the medieval way of looking at astronomy and the cosmos as a entity of beauty that expresses liturgical truth and beauty to us. I think you're definitely defining it in a way that is what I'd like to see recovered in the classical education movement. I think it's a really important element to the whole seven liberal arts that is lacking today. I'd like to see more people like you stand up and show how to bring this kind of truth and delight into the classroom for K-12 education. But yeah, go ahead and keep going about the quadrivium.
All right. Well, then I'll add another way of looking at astronomy is it's geometry dancing, or
right.
put it this way, it's geometry in motion.
Yeah.
How does it go? There's a hymn. It's to the ash grove, and it has in it, "The stars in their courses obediently shine." So you might call it geometry in motion.
Mm-hmm.
And then music. Music is vibrations.
Mm-hmm.
And you can count them. Plus, when you sing it, by the way, I have a strong opinion about singing. Everyone should sing. Almost no one is really
right.
deaf to pitch. They think they are. Let me tell you a little story about that. Very simple. At St. John's College, when I went there in 1965 as a freshman, and I think they still do it, they have a freshman chorus. What is freshman chorus? The whole freshman class. It was about 100 and 20 students, I guess, my year, fit into a room called the Great Hall. And in this Great Hall, one of the tutors sits down at the piano and assigns you to your part in vocal music: bass, tenor, alto, soprano. And I thought I couldn't sing. So, and they force you to, you have to go. It's a required class. Up you go. You stand by the piano. Tutor plunks a key and says, "Sing that." La, whatever it was. And then he punched another one. Oh, whatever. Right. And then if you know your Dante, there's a place where in hell where one of the local citizens, Minos, curls his tail the number of circles you're going to go down to the bottom. And this was like standing before Minos. He would look at you after he said that, and then he said to me, "You're a bass." And I felt I'd been sent to the inferno. But by the end of the freshman year, we were singing things from the Bach B minor Mass and in parts, and it turned out I had a good voice. I was just afraid, or more likely proud. Didn't want to be embarrassed. That's the way to put it. Boy, does that ever happen to boys. Our voices change more. Here's one little tip. If you're teaching boys, don't panic when they're in the ninth grade about their posting or in the whenever it happens. On the other side, they'll come out and sound like angels. The boys, of course, the little ones already sound like angels.
That's right. Well, we start every morning after we do some physical exercising. I teach middle school boys, and I only have 8 students in the whole school, and so we can do some things with them that, as you've just demonstrated, can also be done at a larger scale. What did you say? Your whole freshman class was singing together, but we'll gather on the piano and we'll sing a hymn before we go to class. And I could say with some confidence that I can probably predict with some degree of accuracy how the day is going to go based on how they sing first thing in the morning. There's something about that that sort of, no pun intended, but sort of sets the tone for the rest of the day.
Yeah, I agree. We say a prayer before class, but in recent years we've begun to shift over to singing it. It's a chant. It's a very simple tune that we do. By the way, that goes over to the home as well. If you have a large enough family, you can sing in parts, even with 1 or 2 children. The parents and the child or children can sing. I was in the hospital 4 Christmases ago. Is that right? 5. I had a quadruple bypass surgery, open heart surgery, and my kids, 5 of them, I think, were able to visit me. They're a bit spread out over the country, and they had learned. I'm going to cry. They had learned in parts a beautiful, beautiful Marian hymn. I think it was Austrian, and sang it for me. And we sang other things too. It was the best Christmas Eve I've ever had. And we used to host a 12th night party, Epiphany, right? And we'd have books for them. The guests would sing. People can sing, and when they do, it lifts the heart and mind. I just can't say that passionately enough.
Yeah. So true.
Adrian, I wonder if you are familiar, and perhaps Richard, you've heard of. There's a Catholic boys' school. I want to say somewhere in Pennsylvania. Is it Gregory the Great?
Oh yeah, I get students from there.
That's what it's called. Oh, what? I wonder. All of them do quite a bit of singing. In fact, they have a series of YouTube videos where you can find their boys singing. And I think I stumbled upon it when I was just looking for a list of songs to sing with boys, teaching at an all boys school as I do. And I seem to remember, and I don't know if I read this somewhere on their site or if I heard it in an interview with their headmaster, but one of the things that he talks to his boys about when they're learning songs, teaching them to sing together and for one another, is he asks them, what they would want to sing together if they were to come back together for a reunion, or more pointedly, at the funeral of one of their fellow students. And I think that putting it in those terms, really speaks to, I think, something you were getting to, when you were in a moment of weakness and your family gathered around you, to be able to sing with you, just creates a bond and a resonance with the shared humanity you have together as a family that really only happens in song. And so to have a shared hymnal, as it were, and to be able to come together at any moment and at various times sing hymns appropriate for the moment, or folk songs or songs of rejoicing. I mean, any number of different songs. I think is quite right. And sadly, many students are in so many ways denied that birthright, as it were.
You know, that was part of the public school, at least up to the 6th grade, when I was a boy. I'd like to segue from here to the application of that, or the what shows up in civic education. We have a smaller hymnal, but I bet you know it by heart. America the Beautiful, Star Spangled Banner, My Country 'Tis of Thee.
Yeah.
You ought also to know the Battle Hymn of the Republic, the Battle Cry of Freedom, and the Revolutionary War hymn, Chester, which I suspect you don't know. Do you? It starts. Want me to sing a little?
I don't know it either.
Let tyrants shake their iron rod, and slavery clank her galling chain. We'll fear them not, we trust in God. New England's God forever reigns. There you go. Now notice,
Thank you.
That's an American Revolutionary War hymn, and they just see their cause entirely tied up with God. And they're for freedom. They talk about slavery and their chain, and trusting in God. And that's our Protestant brothers and sisters that are singing that. In the John Adams bio video, that it's a very good. I don't watch a lot, hardly any video and television. Video is so, what do I call it? Well, print is dense in information. Video is slow and what's the opposite of dense? Rare. That makes it sound good, but not very packed with information. It goes too slowly.
Shallow.
It's kind of shallow. Yeah. Now there are things that are really worth seeing. I'm thinking now of American history. The Gettysburg movie is wonderful. And so is that John Adams biography, and he sings that in the actor does, in a New England church, in a Congregationalist church, when they're deciding whether to really revolt, or whether to declare independence. People around him are singing it, and he's not singing it. And Abigail kind of pokes him. Adams was cautious, but his wife, who was a pepper pot in the movie anyway, gets him to sing it. It's a moving moment.
Yes, I think there can be moments in film that can stick with a person, and I do wonder, though, because of the nature of that medium and how students interact with it so constantly.
Yeah.
Right. That I wonder if it doesn't have the same effect as it had on me. Let's say as a young student, when the teacher would cart in the television with the
I remember that.
VHS play. I mean, this was the VHS play. This was an exciting moment. And
for me, it was the big reel-to-reel projectors.
Yeah. Now, me too. That.
And so, I did sort of with those memories in mind. When I was teaching, we were studying the Civil War with my middle school boys, and I thought, well, I certainly have to show them at least one episode of the Ken Burns documentary. It's just such a masterful documentary. And of course, they were thrilled that we were watching a movie. But I can tell you that comparing them watching of that, it was 2 days worth of watching the film. Comparing that to the things that we read and then narrated,
Yeah.
they remembered almost none of the film. It kind of shocked me how little of the film they stuck with them.
Let me back that up with a personal anecdote, kind of. As I say, I'm 73, so the what Gettysburg was in 1863, so the centennial of it was 1963. I'm 15 years old in 1963, and a voracious reader, right? So I have been reading about the Civil War from the I don't know what 10, not constantly. I didn't read much about it at St. John's, but on and off, a lifetime interest. I also play war games, board games. The very first high quality board games were of the Battle of Gettysburg. The company, Avalon Hill, put out 2 of them, and I bought them. I went to the store, poured over them like a kid in front of candy. Looked at the rules, looked at the counters, the whole thing. Right. I saw the Ken Burns Civil War series too, and I don't mean to boast or be a sourpuss, but I had the following feeling. I thought everything he's treated is so inadequate compared to what I got from reading in this lifetime of reading.
Wow.
I mean, look at him doing the Battle of Antietam, and I think, oh yeah, but you should have paid more attention to what happened to Sedgwick's column formation.
Well, it's like anyone who's read the book before they've seen the movie, right?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. So I do that with my own students right now. The ones I'm teaching this year, I show them something on the Battle of Saratoga. We were doing the Revolutionary War, right? And I might show them a little bit of Gettysburg movie. I'm not going to spend the whole time on it, though. For one thing, I'm being paid for it. They want what I have. They can go watch the movie somewhere else. So yeah. Now, are we being naive to think that we can develop readers the way we were readers when we were young? What do you think?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think, though, it depends on the opportunities that parents choose for their children to be educated. I mean, that's kind of why we're doing this whole Facebook page group, the whole group, the podcast. We're going to be offering some more services because there's a lot of parents who really are discouraged by the system of education and looking for options. And I think that the whole classical education movement gives the best option. Not all classical schools are the same,
No.
and not all of them are great. Many of them and most of them are much better than the public school options that are out there. But not all public schools are terrible either. I mean, there's still some good ones. But I think this idea that that we can't create great readers because of the whole competition with technology is false. But I think that the parents have to be a lot more intentional and a lot more what's the word? The parents need to educate themselves. They need to read. They need to set an example. They need to read stories to their children. They need to turn off the television, limit it to an hour a day, or one movie a week. When my kids were little, we did one movie a week, and that was it. We read out loud to our children, and I think that's still available. Like, you just have to be a lot more intentional about it.
And it doesn't have to be in a school. For example, both my wife's family and now my family usually read Dickens' Christmas Carol out loud at Christmas. There's a wonderful Elizabeth Goudge book called "I Saw Three Ships."
I love Elizabeth Goudge. I saw that you posted about that Christmas book, and I just ordered it. I'm It's one of the few by her that I don't own, which is shocking because I have a whole shelf dedicated to her.
And school can meet um, the ambient culture. I now mean the healthy parts of it. For example, religious services, um,
Mhm.
where scripture is read. Okay, so this is a real experience in my firstborn son in his life. And we do. And they should recite poetry, by the way.
That's right.
So
Mhm.
we force them to learn poetry. It's worked better with some and worse with others. But anyway, he did uh, the one about the destruction of the host of Sennacherib. The Assyrian came
Mhm.
down like a wolf on the fold, and his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold. That one. Um, so that was in the poetry we chose. It's a good poem, classic poem, right?
Mhm.
And then at that time we were able to go to daily mass. So one day in that period we went to daily mass, and lo and behold, in the as one of the books of Kings, the destruction of Sennacherib's army, of the Assyrian army, was the Old Testament reading, you know. And when we walked out of mass, I turned to him and said, "Isn't that wonderful? It's one world. It's a whole. The parts fit together. You know, here you heard it in church, there it was by an English poet. You know, isn't it wonderful to feel in a world?"
That's
And I
right.
think he did. Yeah.
Mhm.
So and about what the parents can do, by the way, probably the very first thing is indulge their desire to read.
Right.
It's worth it. You're not so
Yeah.
busy. This is one of the important things to do. Reread. Read things you loved. Um,
That's right.
uh, you don't have to be I don't know, sort of brutally a disciplinarian on yourself. Read
Mhm.
something that you wanted to do again that you really liked. Um,
That's right. I saw somebody post on Facebook today something about, it was a really great quote, and it was about reading aloud to your children so that they will become better at literacy, which is totally true. I mean, there's
yes.
data and there's science to prove this. And I made the comment back and I said, well, my husband and I still read stories out loud to each other because we're always trying to improve our literacy. You never stop. You should never, ever stop trying to improve your own literacy. There's so much to learn, and there's still so many vocabulary words that I come across and I'm pretty well read, but there are still many words I come across I've never heard of. So
You
you just
never
never stop.
acquire
Right.
the whole English vocabulary. It's just
Right.
not possible. English is a wonderful language, by the way.
Hmm.
It's one of the richest languages in the world, partly because it's kind of a pirate language.
Hmm.
It steals everybody's goods.
It's true.
Um, but it has a very big vocabulary. People like to sing the praises of Latin. Latin has its virtues, but its vocabulary is impoverished compared to English or Greek.
Hmm.
Um, it's not the richest language. Uh, it's kind of a streamlined language. I compare it to river stones, smoothed down by centuries of use in law, liturgy, and elsewhere. Greek, on the other hand, is like granite. It's crunchy and shiny. And English too. English is like that too. Coming back to English for a moment. Now, folks may not agree with me about this, but we were talking about the liberal arts. The three liberal arts by tradition are grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Um, how to teach those, and especially with uh, children.
Hmm.
My own view is, with the exception of grammar, which can be taught in a combination of sentence diagramming and a study of a foreign language, particularly Latin or Greek, um, or German. German's very good for grammar too. French, forget it. But anyway, a language with a marked syntax is a great way to understand grammar. But you probably ought to do it after you've done some English grammar and sentence diagramming. I find many people who did sentence diagramming when they were younger saying, "I loved it. It
Hmm.
was like a puzzle solving thing that I enjoyed." The other thing is, however, not everybody's like that, and so well, try to at least pay attention to how the sentence makes sense. What would
Right.
it mean if I pulled an adjective out? And by the way, that word there is called an adjective.
Mm-hmm.
Now, rhetoric, frankly, I don't think there's anybody's curriculum that ever teaches rhetoric. I know there were some in colonial times, and there are books by some of the Romans on it. But rhetoric is practice makes perfect for me. That's what I think. Give a speech, set up a debate, and related to rhetoric is reading out loud.
That's right. That's right.
You don't just read to your children; you have them read to you.
Yes.
And reciting. By the time my firstborn son was, I don't know, about 12, I think, he was able to recite from the Lattimore translation almost all of the 23rd book of the Odyssey. That's the death of the suitors. I tell you, that's really stirring to have a somewhat spirited son standing up there and describing that fabulous bloodbath. You don't want to make your education too I hate to use the word this way, but feminine. You got to allow boys to be boys and spirited girls to be spirited too. There's an awful lot of maybe temptation to be too tender when the thing is run by mothers. I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. And Adrian, I think I've shared this with you before, but in my very short teaching experience thus far, I've been one of a few male teachers, especially at these lower grades, and it is. I can't tell you how many female teachers have come up to me and just talked about the importance of having males in the classroom and having an environment in which you have men being men, right, and modeling that for the children, both boys and girls. And so there's a lot we could say about that. I wonder if we could go back to our conversation about reading, because this is something that's near and dear to our hearts, and we would like to see not only more people reading in general, but we'd like to see teachers reading.
Yes.
It seems to me that there seems to be a lack of reading on the teacher's part, and the teacher is really the model, first and foremost, outside of the home, of the person reading well. And so there's the question of, it seems to me that there are three things, and there's perhaps more, but one is, okay, well, what should we read? How should we read it? And also, I had a third one. What was it? Why should we read it? Right? Yeah. And so oftentimes what we see in parents and teachers looking for resources, they're like, well, if you can just give me a book list, right? Well, that's a starting place, but there's also the question of, well, why are you going to read those books and at what time and with what people, right? With what human beings in front of you, would it be appropriate to read those things? And so perhaps you can just sort of riff on that idea a little bit of the importance of reading with those questions in mind.
Let me take it in my strong suit, which is American history, or maybe history generally. So, of course, there are age questions, and I'm not much of an expert on what they should be reading before the age of about 10. But the old landmark books for history generally and American history in particular, some of those were written by people like Robert Penn Warren and really McKinley Cantor, people who were prize-winning authors, and they're very good, and they're moving. Reading in history should be, I want to say pious, by which I don't mean religious, but civic piety. They ought to be reading about heroes, and great accomplishments, things that will make them love their country and love themselves better as children of that country.
Right.
That doesn't mean that some of them won't have conflict. How are you going to admire Lincoln unless you see that slavery was wrong, right? So the other characters will come in. I'm staying with literature for a moment, but I want to go to other things quickly. I strongly recommend Stephen Vincent Benet. The John Brown's Body is like an epic poem for Americans about the Civil War. My grandfather gave me a copy when I was a boy. Or The Devil and Daniel Webster. That's a great story. So, yet at the end of the day, it's profoundly pious. And Daniel Webster, after he dies, is said to have come up from the grave and says, "How fares the Union?" So you see the good and the bad both in that wonderful story. There's one with, is it By the Waters of Babylon? That imagines New York City after a kind of a catastrophe. That's a very good story for boys. An Indian goes back and he discovers the civilization that we had. Really fine story. But now to go to what they can read later, which is what I know much better. They can read the Declaration of Independence when they're, I don't know, 10.
Yep.
But better when they're 10th grade, 13, 14, 15. Now, when they do, you will immediately have a built-in vocabulary. How does the word denounce get used there? What is a decent regard? And so forth.
I have a friend who loves diagramming, and she diagrammed the whole, I think, first sentence, the preamble. It's pretty incredible and beautiful.
Yeah. Now they have more complex sentence structure usually. Same thing's true for the Constitution. But you don't just have them read it; you have to go through it bit by bit, and therefore you have to know something, and therefore you should read. The prepared teacher is always better than the unprepared teacher. You can't just say, "Read this, kid," and then he asks you, "What exactly is impeachment?"
Right.
All right. Well, you see. And I find it's hard, even with good students. There are many, many things that they do not know. But then in a way, what are we doing? We're teaching history. We wind up teaching etymology of words and complexity of concepts on the side. So we're doing a bit of philosophy and a bit of English reading power, as well as understanding the document. And when they do, they feel they've accomplished something.
It
was gibberish before, and now it's not.
Right. Yeah. So interestingly, you're actually teaching all of the language arts, right, of logic, grammar, and rhetoric at the same time. And Adrian, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I was reading in Sister Miriam's book the other day, she puts it in that order: logic, grammar, rhetoric. Does she not?
I believe she does. And even the ancients actually had grammar and rhetoric together. And then later logic and dialectic came in. Really, dialectic was more so than logic. And logic is more tied to math. And dialectic is more tied to the discussions.
Yeah. Natural philosophy and ethics and politics. But tell you the truth, I would go, well, logic should show up every time you have kids together having conversation and they argue.
That's right. That's right. It doesn't matter if they're 3 years old or 15 years old.
Yeah,
right. They're just going to learn to get better at it as they get older.
I would teach logic. I would not teach logic at all, except I would teach Euclid. And ask you. That's what Lincoln did, by the way. He says so himself in some autobiographical statement that he really wanted to understand what a conclusive argument was. So he read the first 6 books of Euclid on his own. No one told him to. And there's a book, I just got a copy, a friend gave it to me, arguing that Lincoln's speeches can be understood by looking at the logic in Euclid.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Isn't it?
Yes,
Now,
it's fascinating.
now,
Again,
so
you're showing us, though, this, I love that you said that, because this is where I think the message of all learning is integrated is
yes,
super important.
yes.
And people, we still want to categorize everything and compartmentalize the departments in the schools. And this is something I think classical schools need to really, really think about hard when they're developing their school. If it's a brand new classical school or it's a school that's transitioning to classical, really be thinking about the integration of this, of all of the learning. I'm a huge fan of humanities. In fact, I'm a huge fan of, when you're in middle school, do not have a separate history and English teacher. Have a humanities teacher and give them 100 minutes
There
in
you
their
go.
period, so that they're teaching English and history together. There's no reason to separate it.
And consequently, if you read now in our history, I mentioned the two chief documents, right?
Hmm.
But if you read the speeches of our statesmen,
Right.
Again, you cannot see what they're saying unless you slow down and unpack the logic.
That's right.
Nor can you see how it moves you unless you unless you look to the rhetoric. And the
Mhm.
way to get the rhetoric from a lot of people is to read the speech out loud,
That's
or
right.
even memorize parts of it. So we have them memorize the Gettysburg Address. We have them memorize the opening two paragraphs of the Declaration and declaim it. You know, that's a checklist. They have to do that.
Yep, this is exactly what Quintilian says, everything you're saying. And Quintilian's one of my favorites. And his orations book, it's very, very accessible. And I really wish that I could get more teachers to read it. It's not difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's difficult. It's rich, it's beautiful, it's not terribly dense.
Right.
And I think every teacher should at least read book 1, 2, and 3 of Quintilian's oration. It's beautiful, and it's exactly what you're saying. And he ties grammar, dialectics, and rhetorics all into one way of teaching, all of it. And it's exactly what you just said on speeches. It's perfect.
In consequence of that, by the way, I myself think that I would put rhetoric at the end as crowning. That was the Renaissance attitude.
Sure, sure.
Different people can do different things, right?
Well,
But,
and I think you're right, especially if you're going to teach the formal aspects of rhetoric. Yes, definitely. The formal rhetoric as a subject, learning all the elements of it definitely is a high school matter.
Right.
or
So-
if
so
or
let's-
if you're going to do it inductively, if you're going to look at the
Yeah.
look at Calvin Coolidge's speech on the 150th anniversary of the Declaration,
Sure.
and notice his tricks. Notice.
Right.
By the way, if you, I gave a whole lecture on that last year, and you can get to it at the Thomas Aquinas website if you poke around a bit. The recording, well, the text
Mhm.
and the actual delivery. You cannot study the sufferings and triumphs of this wonderful republic and the way they are put to our fellow citizens by our statesmen without your heart being moved.
I agree.
And oh, you're murdering the soul if you make history dry.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there are other nations and other traditions and other customs, but just as everyone should love his family first and know and live with those people first, so you should know your country first and live with it first, and know it first. It's not to say you shouldn't do other things too, but that should be the central thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the question of justice through action is most real to you. You know,
This is the whole point of Paideia.
Yeah.
The whole point of Paideia is to learn how to love your fellow man, to live together in piety and respecting one another, but also knowing your country and loving your country is
Yep.
all tied up in what the whole meaning of Paideia.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, Richard, to get back to a question you asked fairly early on about do we have much hope in sort of
Yeah.
restoring this way of reading? And one observation that I think is accurate is that we actually do a lot more writing, sort of in the very basic sense of like just producing words, right? Because of social media, right? Lots of posting, lots of texting, lots of, now, obviously we wouldn't call that writing, except in the most basic sense.
Yeah, but it is
But
basic.
people are doing a lot of writing, and we're doing a lot of reading, a lot of really, I would say, consuming of content, right? Consuming of content, and this gets back to this question of, well, how then should we read? Because let's say that we've got our reading list, we've got our books in front of us. Part of this is related to an attitude. You talked about being pious, right? So that's a posture and an attitude. But then there's also just the very technical sort of process of reading itself. And what I think we can say is the habit of reading online and just consuming a lot of content rapidly and moving from thing to thing does sort of it changes your brain. And it does set you up to be in not a very great spot to then sit down and read in this sort of contemplative mode that you just described, or in this mode that is open to the depth and richness of individual words that then turn into paragraphs that have a gift there waiting for us to unpack. I heard a story about a young girl who reported with great glee to her parents that she doesn't even read her school assignments because she can just look for the key words or look for the answer to sort of fill in the blank or to produce the answer that her teacher is looking for, which seems to me to be just the opposite of what reading ought to be. So
I can tell you why that happens, Trey. It's because, I've worked with K-12 teachers for the last 7 years in massive numbers of schools. I've worked with thousands of teachers. And the reason most of the teachers I work with the school is a progressive school transitioning to classical. And one of the things that these teachers struggle with the most that they're taught in college for K-5 education is you teach them reading strategies. And a lot of reading strategies is teaching them how to skim and highlight so they can take the test. It's not reading.
Right.
It's just not reading. And it's tragic. And it is rewiring the brains. And this is why we have a whole generation of children who are growing up that don't like to read. Because they've actually never read.
There's another thing. I want now. Maybe this is just my experience, but I want to say it's a little bit like what I was saying about rhetoric. I didn't mention the fact that I had a sort of political career as well, but I think it comes later. You have to have something to say. You have to know something first before you can make your case. You have to have some sense of logic and so on. Well, similarly, I now do more skimming than I ever have. That's because I already know how to read. Right. And I can distinguish the wheat from the chaff. And I'm actually on the lookout for something in particular, for various reasons. Maybe it's an historical matter that I'm trying to find a particular point about. Maybe I want to be in an argument with somebody about current politics or whatever. But skimming or that kind of reading strategy that's terrible for younger people. And it's true that the habit is there or is formed that way. So what do you say? I mean, you want them to unfold the book in front of them with you in conversation, and most of all, if something really nifty pops up, if you pay attention to the words in a Shakespeare speech, and you can see, oh, that was cool. And that's going to affect the character he's speaking to. That works. When he says that, it works with her. That kind of thing. Now, that's for older students. but you can even do that a little bit with some of the good children's stories.
Yep. That's
And
right.
by the way, and enjoy it with them.
Mhm.
Don't say, "Oh, this is my favorite part here." It's coming. This is the best thing in Cat in the Hat.
Mhm.
My daughter has 2 sets of twins.
Oh.
Um,
Wow.
and yeah, as well as 5 other kids, and we had 8. She has 9. And because I read Dr. Seuss, I enjoy calling them Thing 1 and Thing 2 from the Cat in the Hat.
Yes.
Um, also, another thing about reading: just have books in your house. Give each other books for birthdays and Christmas, and now you can also go to the library. But in a way, I'm looking, Trey, at your bookcase. I can just see it behind you there. Have you got me on video? You can't see me.
I can't.
You don't. That's all right. That's no problem. Anyway, I'm looking at that. If you did have me on video and I turned the screen a little, there would be one of about, I don't know how many, 12 bookcases in the house. We're rich. We're rich.
That's right.
We weren't all that rich all my life. We're pretty poor in some times, but we're rich in books. Now, one other thing about reading, it's almost the contrary of what we were saying. Some books are, how do I want to put it? They're just delicious, and you don't have that much trouble reading them. And you take them, you go into your room and read them for fun. If you have a child, get away from the rest of the family, and finish Voyage of the Dawn-Treader because it's way cool, and you're just engrossed in it, right? And then, now, if those are good books, they also help you learn how to read. But it is kind of important that you love reading, and so you got to give yourself some treats, parents and students.
Yeah, I love how you were describing reading Dr. Seuss, because I think it taps into the truth that children, and Dr. Seuss knew this, and of course, Dr. Seuss certainly read a lot of Mother Goose. And children they can delight in words, and they will, it seems to me, continue to delight in words if they see people around them whom they love delighting in words.
Yeah.
Right? I'll tell you just a very brief anecdote of this that I think is funny. Hopefully the listeners will find it funny as well. My son, when he was about 3, was always, and he still is, just coming up with these wild games and just ideas, things that he wants his mother or I, and now his siblings, to participate in, right? And he came up with some off-the-wall idea, and Mom was cooking dinner, and he ran into the kitchen and said, "Mom, will you do this and this and that?" And she said very casually, "Well, that's tempting, but..." And before she could even finish her sentence, he said, "Tempting but? What's a tempting but?" And it just strikes me that the children at that age are hearing words sometime for the very first time.
Right.
And
or they're seeing that they apply.
And that too, yes, exactly.
There's a religious child, I'm not sure which family that was in, who had learned the Our Father, so lead us not into temptation, and had come across the notion of temptation in a religious sense. And one time she's visiting her grandmother, and her grandmother offers her a spoon of the cake batter. And the little girl says, "Oh, I'm not supposed to eat that." And the grandmother says, "Oh, come on, honey, you'll like it. It's really nice." And her eyes get really wide, and she said, "You're tempting me."
There you go.
I love that story.
Well, many people have commented on, of the importance of rhyme and Mother Goose and these stories that, and some are nonsense rhymes.
Yeah.
And yet they have this way of helping or allowing you, let's say, to delight in words. And I do believe that in addition to just putting yourself in touch with reality through experiences in nature and just sort of getting out and putting yourself sort of in contact with the world, it seems to me that the child who is raised on Mother Goose and Dr. Seuss and Ogden Nash, among others.
Oh, you mentioned Nash, yes.
Who also gets outside and has been out on an open body of water and has even been out on an open body of water in the middle of a storm. That person is ready to read Homer.
Yeah. Speaking of Ogden Nash and temptation, do you know the sort of a kind of ode to duty? Oh, duty, why hast thou not the visage of a sweetie or of a cutie? That's the whole poem.
That's great. I love Edward Lear's nonsense limericks.
Yes,
They're
yes.
hilarious. They're great for little kids.
And everyone should learn, every child should learn, 'twas brillig, and the slithy toe did gyre and gimble in the wabe, from Lewis Carroll. That's a good one. Nonsense. By the way, after you enjoy it, you can think about it and say, there's some way in which that sounds like it makes sense. Why is that?
Right.
And then you can say, oh, it has the sentence structure of the way we actually speak. I think that word's a verb, and that's an adjective.
That's right. It's like Jabberwocky's like that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. I realized we never finished talking about. We talked about. I think your question a while back, Trey, was describe the 7 liberal arts and the useful arts, as Richard wants us to call it. Did we ever finish that?
No, I guess we didn't. I mean, we did go through all the 7 liberal arts.
Yes.
But we didn't ask about how the well-educated human being who has strengthened his mind and opened his heart to what he reaches through those arts is also prepared to be a good architect or a good nurse or a good contractor even. I'm not sure how to persuade people of it. I just want to say, I've seen it. I believe it. For one thing, you've learned how to deal with what you don't understand. If you've learned the liberal arts, you've learned ways to come to the next thing, something like that, the unknown thing, and place it in a context and work on it and make it make sense. That's what you learn to do very well in the 7 classical liberal arts, as well as in literature and history that you read, and science. Well, those same things come up in being an electrician.
Right.
I get this, I don't get that, and also a little caution about giving yourself a shock. But anyway, you face new things. Any physician will tell you that he does not work simply by routine. He has to know how to think about this patient, the one in front of me. That's how any psychologist, of course, will tell you that. And how in public office,
and how to interact. So we're back to logic and rhetoric here. Rhetoric teaches you how to be, civil discourse, how to have a respectful debate, or how to have a beautiful conversation.
Yeah.
And respect other people, meaning going back to the purpose of education being basically how to love and be a good human being.
Yep.
And so yeah, it's pointing back to literally every job you have, no matter what it is, you need to learn how to love other people.
Yeah. Well, I can say that, in my years during and then right after college, before I well, I went into the Army as a logistics officer, and I could tell some stories there. But I've worked a number of different manual labor jobs, one in which I was doing insulation in attics, or oftentimes we would be putting down vapor barriers in people's basements. And so I was working with a variety of people, some who were like the foreman, who was a specialist, sort of trained in um, in that field, to know how to then tell us his workmen what and how to do things. Some um, let's say foreign workers who spoke very little English,
Yeah.
but were there with us right in the thick of it. And I can tell you that once sort of the conversations that needed to take place about what we were there to do, and once everyone was up to a level of skill to where they could do it without much guidance, the things we talked about pertained very little to the job at hand and had to do more with um, the meaning of life, everything from what it means to be a good man. I got married fairly early in life, and so at least by today's standards. And so a lot of men in their 30s, when I was 21 years old, would be asking me questions about being married, right?
Yeah.
And so having conversations about existential questions, having conversations about things that really can only best be handled by telling stories and being able to draw from my liberal arts education. That didn't mean I was down there giving lectures on, Shakespeare, but at least I had that to draw from, and it just gave a richness to my ability to think through these things that those men who were not educated in that way, but still wrestled with, and when they went home and laid their head on the pillow at night, thought about these deeply human questions.
Yep. Well, you must remember this: a kiss is still a kiss, a sigh is still a sigh. The fundamental things remain as time goes by. And Bogart in that movie was not a philosopher, but he spoke the truth. Actually, that's the singer, isn't it? The piano player in Casablanca. It's a thing to warn parents against, I think, that there are a lot of technical skills and things they might teach you in a business program that by the time you've gotten out and are in business have changed. And every now and then the Wall Street Journal has an article praising liberal education for just that point, that the managers will say, actually, my best guy in the head of whatever department it is, he knew nothing about this industry when he came in. That you can learn on the job, but you can't learn tact and you can't learn eloquence on the job. You have to have acquired that earlier. Well, maybe you can, but it's rare. It's much better to learn the central things first. And they are tools. They are tools. Let's call them instruments or means. They are means and ends both. What's not to like? They're useful and beautiful. That's the way everything we own should be: useful and beautiful. By the way, one other thing is, since I'm venting on all my opinions, you've kindly asked me to do so. I'm not too keen on a top-heavy view of natural science governing the experience of nature. I'm much more keen on having a vegetable garden or working on building a rock wall with your dad, or having an activity that is and then you learn something about balance if you build a rock wall, right? You don't have to come in and say, now we're going to have a test on this about the notion of center of gravity, which you read about last week, and so on.
That's right.
And observation, hypothesis, conclusion.
Yeah.
I'm not big on that. Everybody fish for trout.
Mhm.
You know
That's
what
right.
you're trying to do. You make a move that doesn't work. You get tangled up. You'll learn.
Yeah. Well,
And by the way,
you're
you
among
learn
kindred
water.
spirits here.
Trey, share your stories about your. Yeah, go. You've got lots of them. Just go.
Well, I'm in a very special place in a unique program that thinks a lot about what boys need in education through those very means that you were describing. And so, one of the things that we had the boys do together, we go every Friday out to the farm that belongs to the founders of the school, and oftentimes, we ask them to do rather simple chores, and sometimes we have projects where we're building something that requires instruction and them to follow a blueprint or something. But one day we had some decking that just needed the nails removed, just rusty nails that needed to be pulled out. So we just gave them a handful of hammers of all different types and some crowbars, and we didn't really give them a whole lot of instruction. We just let them have at it. Now, as we were pulling nails, I was talking to the boys about certain things. I said, okay, if one of you steps on a nail, I need you to tell me immediately, especially if it doesn't start bleeding. And so all of a sudden, they're getting a biology lesson, let's say, learning about the human body, just because one thing leads to another, right? Just thinking about what we're going to need to do to get these nails out of these boards. Of course, they're figuring out on their own, leverage and how to use these tools. And it doesn't require a whole lot of instruction, really just a presence, and they can watch me do it, right? And in watching me do it, they can then apply what they're seeing. Saying things like, hey, boys, make sure all these nails get in that wheelbarrow over there and that none of them are left in the grass. Because if, a tractor tire comes through here, that could be $500 damage, right?
Yeah.
And they're just taking these things in, right? It's not really anything other than just good conversation about the thing we're doing together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm a huge advocate for nature study being the primary science curriculum for K-5. And by that I mean children learning how to get away from the screen, the TV, go outside and learn how to listen and use your five senses and find a leaf. Let's go look at this leaf. What does it feel like? What are some adjectives you could use to describe what this leaf feels like, what it smells like? Draw the leaf in your nature book and let's measure the leaf and add numbers, just learning how to do very close observation with your senses and learning how to use a ruler and measure, tying it all together into a little nature journal, so that they actually learn how to start thinking like a scientist before they learn the formal sciences.
My wife has a little box, largish box, like a chest of drawers, maybe outside. It's California, so we don't have to worry too much. And it's the museum, and it has in it an owl's claw, a little model of a rocking horse oil pump, things they found. We picked up a fox that was by the side of the road, freshly killed. We looked up on the internet how to get a fox tied off of a fox. Yeah, so a lot of this can be adventitious.
Mm-hmm.
Follow your nose. You like that? Good. Oh, another thing you should do, though, as well as where nature study tends to mean biological nature study, right? Although it could include geology, but astronomy.
Astronomy, right.
Yeah, go out and look at the
Yes,
stars.
and the clouds and yes, all of that. I'd rather the kids learn about clouds from actually journaling them and tracking the weather than just from a textbook telling them the different kinds of clouds.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Then with the stars, then you can learn some of the myths. It's
That's right.
wonderful how everything connects to everything else.
That's true.
And if the teacher has that feeling, the students can get it.
It's true.
Richard, I wonder, since you're well, you're at a place where you can confidently lead with your opinions, and I think your opinions are worth hearing and worth listening to. So I wonder if maybe you could talk for a minute about something that we are seeing in development in the world of education, and that is this use of virtual reality or the virtual classroom.
I don't think it's at present very good, and I rather doubt that it ever will be. Are you a creationist or an evolutionist or both? Whatever you want to say to that. We have a certain nature that's connected with seeing and touching and smelling each other with details of facial expression that do not come through on a video. And three-dimensionality in our depth perception, in our sight, and so on and so forth. I have taught. I have taught via Zoom. I have a kidney transplant. That was right after the heart surgery. Funny story there. The kidney surgeon is a woman. Wow, wonderful woman. She said, "I am not going to have you die on my operating table. You must have this heart surgery first." Okay, so
Wow.
Yeah, so I had the open heart surgery in December, and March of the next year I had the kidney transplant. My son gave me my firstborn.
Wow.
His kidney.
Mm-hmm.
Why was I saying all that? I just moved myself. Anyway. Oh, I know. So with the COVID thing, they didn't want me in the classroom because I'm immunocompromised. You have to take immunosuppressants if you have an organ transplant, right?
Right.
So I did some Zoom classes. It was grossly inadequate. Now I realize you're going to wear goofy looking space helmets or something, or goggles or whatever it is. I don't know what they'll do. I just don't believe it's ever going to be that good. Besides, now they won't let you do this very much anymore. I have such a nice college. You get to be a human being there.
Right.
They won't let you do this in many other places. But you can touch a student, the one next to you on the shoulder, or after class, and say that was a really nice demonstration you did there. Or even, you don't look well. Are you? Have you been sick?
Yeah.
And then you see them going in and out of the class. You walk with them to the next place. Now I'm not thinking of homeschooling, but in a school situation. I'm kind of just dead set against it.
Yeah, I would say one of the things I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about too, with regards to that, is to the homeschooler. I know you homeschooled, you've got experience with teaching homeschoolers, and I homeschooled my children. Trey was homeschooled, so it's very dear to our heart. And what I see is a lot of moms who feel, one, inadequate to homeschool.
Yes.
And number two, they feel a real serious pressure that classical education has to have this intense rigor, and they have to study all of these things so much, and it keeps them so busy that they feel so inadequate and so overwhelmed that some of them are turning towards doing classical education online because the nearest classical school is an hour drive away. I mean,
Yeah.
talk to that mom who's feeling like, I want my kids to have a great education. I'm willing to compromise by doing a virtual thing with them so we can have more family time, which is great. But then at the same time, why aren't they just homeschooling? Like, talk to that mom.
First of all, what kind of community do you live in?
Mm,
Some of you are in a community that has a lot of homeschoolers, whether you know it or not. Uh, some homeschooling has different flavors, but the standard flavor is kind of more classical education, often with a strong religious overtone. Um, if the flavor of your friends, no, so network, find, find out who these people are. Use your website, use your Facebook page, and discover each other. Here's a little story along those lines, right? We started, and now my wife is a St. John's alumna, and she and I are pretty self-confident people. So we didn't think we needed anybody to tell us what to do. We just took off. We did, however, talk, and we didn't know a lot of people doing it. This is 50 years, no, not 50, oh, 40 years ago, maybe 35. There weren't a lot of people doing it, but in the Thomas Aquinas network in our town, there were, or they began to be.
mm-hmm.
My wife and Laura Berkowitz sort of led the charge, I guess, and we worked with Laura on her curriculum some. So yeah, you're on the phone all the time saying, how'd that go for you?
Right.
There are, how do I want to put it? Trust kindly other human beings. Network. That's one thing. Okay, then when it gets a little bigger, you can have, we had homeschool assemblies, we called them. I have a decent sized property that the younger kids anyway could play capture the flag or frisbee football or things like that. They would recite poetry, show off what you've learned to a group. Growing out of that networking and the homeschool assemblies, we then found some of the mothers really rather liked having a small class. So one of them would say, I want to do catechism. And you just drop over to my house. We were on our way to inventing a school, but we didn't go to a full school. Well, actually, part of what came out of that in an indirect way was a school that I got shanghaied into being a board member for. But in any event, human beings, we're social animals. Now, if you're really on your own somewhere in South Dakota, that's harder. That's harder. On the other hand, how about this? Relax and trust God.
Right.
Your children learn. Children are little learning machines anyway. I had a child who did not read until he was 7. I had another one who read when he was 3. The one who was 7 heard us reading out loud the Tolkien trilogy, and reading it to his 2 older brothers. And he had a little bit of instruction in reading, but he was like getting nowhere. And he said, I want to read that. And he somehow started to read it. Just started to read it. Amazing. I mean, maybe he asked help with the word here and there and so on and so forth, but it happened. Had another child who could never do school at all, was get acute anxiety about authority in social situations, and he is dyslexic, or as he would say, dyslarxic. And this is the guy who reads Dostoevsky now, and there are 2 of his siblings who know a smidgen of German, and I do too. We had a bilingual edition of Faust and he's Faust. That is not an easy book. He loves it, and he looks over to the German, and then asks questions. Sometimes German is some kinship with English. It's astonishing what they'll do.
It's true. It's true.
So,
yeah, my one daughter, she didn't read well. She struggled a lot, and she didn't read well till she was about 10 or 11.
mhm.
And she is my child now who loves Dostoevsky. and she one of her favorite books in 10th grade was Blaise Pascal, or Ponzes.
The Pensée.
Yeah, that's one of her
Pascal?
favorite books. She read it when she was in 10th grade.
You'll talk with her, I bet,
Hmm
on and off about the Pascal for years.
hmm
We had a family reunion, and they all said, let's have a seminar on something. Now
Yeah.
I have one who never went to school, um, one who is excellent in school. I'm going the bottom up, right? One who was well, I missed the very bottom. The very bottom was very good in school. Then I have one who was, oh, you know those boys who bluff a lot. You probably have some, right, Trey? Maybe. And they always know the answer right away, and they tell it to you quick as lightning. And he keeps saying to him, what this soul needs is patience, But anyway, he wound up
speaks with a lot of authority and not a lot of knowledge.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, he matured in a better way intellectually. You didn't create these children. You just got the job of shepherding them. You didn't make the sheep.
That's true.
Yeah.
One of the good things about homeschooling. Sorry, go ahead, Trey.
Well, no, please finish your thought.
Well, one of the good things about homeschooling is you can see which child is learning reading slowly, and you don't put him through a machine, step, step, step. He's not military drill. Converse with him, do other things with him, and most of them will come along. I think finally all of them, one way or another.
And you sit next to them and read with them, and what I did with my daughter, and I'm working with a bunch of children from my church right now, some of them who are delayed readers, and I read out loud to them and give them a copy of the same book, and they follow along, and I have them read a sentence every now and then, and they're coming along beautifully. It's just a very organic, natural way of learning how to read, and like you said, you sit alongside them, you coach them, you live with them, you come alongside them, and they learn.
Organic and natural. I told you I'm 73, so that means in 1968 I'm 20, right? You are talking to an ex-hippie.
Right.
Organic and natural appeals to me to this day, as applied to, so to speak, having one life, not one that's that is something in school and something else
right
after. But the whole time in my case, I love to read and think and talk, so that's in school, that's out of school, that's everywhere. You want to be an integrated human being, as they say, and you want to help children to do that too.
It's true.
Do you know any of Hermann Hesse's novels, by the way? Siddhartha.
Siddhartha, The Glass Bead Game.
The Glass Bead Game. Have you read that?
No, it's on my reading list for this next year because Joshua Gibbs recommended it. Something all teachers should read.
I recommend it too. Well, there's an early work, a smaller one, which is quite dark, and it's called Beneath the Wheel. Unter dem Rad, I think is what it is in German. And it's about damage done by schooling, by the bureaucratic lockstep schooling. That's another book I think teachers might want to read. I was mad about Hesse when I was young. Yeah. There's so much. You live in a world of riches. Why should you waste your mind? Or as Dan Quayle said,
That's a
a
good point.
mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Certainly.
It's true.
Well, for those
Yeah, go ahead.
parents who are you know, speaking of being tempted, you know, the temptation that I think one can fall prey to with this virtual reality offer is, you know, is of course speaking to their desire to give good things to their children. This seems like this will sort of be a good fit because it's something that I can. It's a pretty easy solution that also seemingly opens them up to a whole new world of quote unquote realities, let's say. But what we're describing is being put back in contact with the real, right?
Yeah.
Which is precisely not the virtual. And I think that can be demonstrated in a number of ways. One of the ways I've articulated it recently pertains to a study of bees. If I'm going to take my students in a virtual classroom into a study of bees, I may even be able to shrink them down and put them in a beehive in virtual reality, right? But of course, you know, we're not tasting the honey. And someone says, "Oh well, you could bring some honey by, and they can taste it while they're in the virtual reality headset." Okay, fine. But you're not. Is the bee going to be able to sting you?
Yeah.
Right. If it can't
Yeah.
sting you, then you're not studying bees. And my wife, I was telling her this explanation. I was trying to figure out if it was logical and if it made sense. And she said, well, one of the major things that you remove in virtual reality is the fear factor, right? Like if you're not overcoming a fear of bees, right, while you're studying them, like that's something that is missing. That is part of your education,
Yep.
right? How you so it's about the relationship you have with the bee or with the bees, and all of that is either removed and or reduced. And what you're really getting is you're not getting bees, is you're getting information about bees, which is not a study of bees.
Go ahead.
Right. Well, and we take that back to our original question: what is the purpose of education?
Yeah. Well,
Is it to gain knowledge?
Largely, it is. I don't think we should underemphasize that.
Right.
But then I have a kind of passionate view of knowledge, to tell you the truth. If you know it and it doesn't move you, you don't know it. Something
Right.
like that.
But it seems to me that it's important that the gaining of knowledge is just as important as the experience and the relationships in learning to order our loves.
Yeah, I think that too. I mean, all through this interview, I've been associating the heart, the head, and love and truth. Yeah, you have to care. You know, kids sometimes care about kind of gross things. By the way, coming back to virtual bees, we did this. We had bees. We didn't have to keep bees. It was my childhood house in town, and we had some pretty impressive web spinner spiders. I don't know if your kids did this, but you ever get the now who would win, a polar bear or a Bengal tiger, right? I used to hear hours of that. I had 8 kids, you know, right? So we wanted to know if a bee could like sting or defeat a spider, right? So you'd catch a bee in a jar and shake it and stun it a little bit, and then throw it onto the spider web and see if the spider would take it out. Now there's I don't know if you could do that in virtual reality, but you sure could do it in my side yard. So kids can be a little cruel and gross too. That's part of growing up.
That's true.
We did.
And one can only develop even in doing that, and I don't know what boy hasn't done something like that, right?
Yeah.
But even in doing that, you have a relationship with the with the bee and with the spider that is different than if you could just run the program over and
Yeah.
over again,
Yeah, that's right.
in virtual reality.
That's right. But you were saying you have to be afraid of being stung, right? Yeah, we were afraid of being stung. You bet.
I think so, yeah.
Well, I'm thinking we're going to wrap up with a final question, which is we have two questions that we let you choose between them. One is what book do you wish you would have read younger or earlier in your life? Or what's your a favorite quote that you have that's meant a lot to you, and why?
I'll give it to you in Latin, and then I'll translate it. It's from Virgil when he's looking. Excuse me. When he's looking in Carthage at the bas relief that's on the wall, one of the walls that Dido is putting up, and it's Troy. And it has his friends and relatives in the war, people being killed. And he looks at it and he says, "Sunt lacrimae rerum et mortalia mentum tangent." And what that means is there are tears in human affairs, and things doomed to die touch the heart.
Wow.
I cry a lot now that I'm older. Sunt lacrimae rerum. I've really enjoyed talking with you all.
Thank you, Richard. This was a great time, and we're so blessed. And for those of us on the Facebook page, I hope that they are all blessed. I'm sure they will be, and we'll be watching for your words of wisdom on the Facebook page. Thank you, Richard.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you so much for listening. We invite you to experience the art of teaching through interactive learning communities at our Patreon page. Visit patreon.com/classical education. Also, be sure to join the conversation on our Facebook community at facebook.com/groups/classical education. We are a listener-supported podcast, so your support makes this podcast possible. As the great artist and educator John Ruskin once wrote, "Well, my friends, the final result of the education I want you to give your children will be, in a few words, this. They will know what it is to see the sky. They will know what it is to breathe it. And they will know, best of all, what it is to behave under it, as in the presence of a Father who is in heaven."